All right, chordates have 4 traits. All of them have. What are they? Do you remember them? Okay, let's start with that one. Yeah. Notochord. Okay? And next, there's something that runs right next to the notochord. The tail, okay, we'll put that at number 4. Post-anal tail. Okay. What else? Okay, I'll give you number 2. A dorsal hollow nerve cord. Nerve cord. All right, what's the third one? Yes, pharyngeal gill slits. All right, you have this when you were born, or I guess in your embryonic development. Your notochord becomes your intervertebral discs. Which is the squishy part in between your vertebrae, in between the bones that allows your spine to move. Okay? Your dorsal hollow nerve cord becomes let's just put your central nervous system. It becomes your brain and your spinal cord.
One quick question. So the intervertebral disc, those are what people say when they're talking about they screw the disc into the back.
Yes, if you like slip a disc, that's the cartilage between your vertebrae. It would be very painful. Okay, the pharyngeal gill slits become bone and cartilage in your neck and your skull. So there's like a bone behind your eye socket. There's your inner ear bones, the cartilage, which forms your Adam's apple, parts of your jaw are all derived from these pharyngeal gill slits. And your post-anal tail becomes your coccyx. Okay, so we don't really have a tail. Well, most people don't. Some people are born with a tail and usually just get it chopped off like a Doberman pinscher. Yeah, I mean, it's rare, but yeah, like a little tail. Yeah, I don't have one, no. But you could Google it, and I'm sure you could find it. Tail on a person. But yeah, our tail vertebrae become fused and just become this little remnant of a tail behind your hip bones. But you can also break your coccyx, and it's very painful as well. What's that? Yeah, right. You broke your coccyx. All right. So those are a bunch of vertebrae that are all like fused together to form the coccyx.
Yeah, we have a tail.
Used to be a tail.
There's
Yeah.
an embryo, and then it develops into
Yeah, so the same thing actually happens with birds. Birds don't have a tail bone. They have a fused vertebrae, which comes together at the end of their hips. But yeah. Most primates have tails. Well, not most. Like baboons, monkeys have tails. We just don't.
So there's different parts of the coccyx. So does that mean that the tail splits and becomes that?
Okay. Should we do the phylogeny now, or Yeah, let's do the phylogeny. All right, so this is going to be bigger and harder than the other one. According to Matt, this is the one going to be on the test. Okay?
It's getting bigger and harder to get the word.
Oop, this is the wrong one.
I don't think he's gonna give us a word.
All right, so we're going to start with our ancestral chordate. Okay, we don't have a name for this ancestral chordate. Okay, you can make one if you want. All right, and this ancestral chordate is going to have our 4 traits, which we just discussed, right? The notochord, the dorsal hollow nerve cord, pharyngeal gill slits, and postanal tail. Okay, and so this then whole phylogeny belongs to this clade.
Gotcha.
Chordates.
Oh, okay. Starting it off easy.
Yeah.
We're like 2 seconds into this.
So far you shouldn't need a word bank. Yes.
I believe if it was this big, it would be awesome. But it's not.
All right, we have our 2 basal groups, which were mentioned with the invertebrates. Cephalochordata.
Oh shit, this one's gonna be huge too. Oh no.
And Urochordata. All right, these are the lancelets and the sea squirts. Okay? And they have those characters, they have those 4 traits. Sea squirts are really funny. They have a little siphon that squirts water through their body, and they're filter feeders. But they don't really have a definitive head. Right? So our next clade, craniates, which means, what's your cranium? Your skull, right? So these have a head. Okay? Okay, and our basal group of the craniates are the Myxini. So these are hagfish. Okay, they are mostly deep sea invertebrates, and they produce this slime, and they're scavengers in the sea. All right, but they have a head. But they don't have a full vertebrae, and that actually occurs. That's our next clade. And our next character. So then we have a bony spine, vertebrae, and our basal group to that is Petromyzontidae.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna die.
So Myxinis are hagfish. Petromyzontidae are lampreys. Okay? So they have this giant oral sucker filled with a bunch of hooks. And they basically attach to fish or something and then eat their skin or suck their blood. It's kind of like a leech. Okay? But they have these like teeth. They're pretty horrific things, looking things.
Doctor,
Yeah.
you use
Zontida.
Zontiola. Oh, Zontida.
There's a I there.
Is it Zontiola or Zontida?
No, there's a D.
Oh,
Oh, that's the D. I thought that was OL.
LOL.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Those are lampreys. Yes, but they don't have, they have a mouth, but they don't have jaws, right? So our next group is going to have jaws, right? And the clade are called so animals in this are called gnathostomes. They have jaws, and very fittingly, the basal group is chondrichthyes, which are sharks and rays and skates. Okay, and they have a cartilaginous skeleton. They have bony jaws. But it's thought that they used to have bones, and then they evolved this cartilaginous skeleton.
So,
So the cartilaginous skeleton is a derived trait.
so like sharks aren't quite as compact as creatures with bones.
Right. Well, so this kind of chondrichthyes, the way that they stay buoyant, so they do have cartilage is more buoyant than bone, and then they also have a really big liver that has lots of lipids in it, which also helps it float. Right.
do they have the fancy sack thing too?
No, they don't. So that's actually in the next group. And this is our first fish group, Osteichthyes, and they have a swim bladder. Okay, so Osteichthyes, these are bony fish, and so they have bones which allow them to, have more muscular structure for propulsion. But the swim bladder then allows them to pull air out of the water and allows them to be more buoyant or control their buoyancy through that swim bladder. Okay, and I'm already running out of room, but
That means it's too big.
the basal group is Actinopterygii.
Is that a G and
Two I's on the end? Yeah, YGII, Actinopterygii. Yep.
Do you know how many points the phylogeny will be on the test?
I don't know. I haven't written it yet. Probably 10. Actinopterygii are not lobe-finned, but ray-finned fishes. Okay? Most of your fishes belong to this group. The next clade have different types of fins. They have lobe fins. You can put that over here as well. Which are the predecessors to limbs, okay? And we have a few groups in here. We have
Can you zoom in, please?
Actinistia, okay, lobe-finned fishes. And then we have the development of lungs. So these dipnoi are lung fishes. Okay, so they have lobe fins, which are more positioned under the body, similar to how tetrapods are. And they also have lungs. So these fishes, there's a few groups that are still alive today, or a few species. I think there's 3, one in Austria and a couple in Africa. And they go through periods of time where the water dries up and they just curl up in this like mucus ball. They can walk, and they come out of the little puddles that they live in, and they can breathe air. Okay?
That's so cool.
Yeah. All right. But those lobe fins then eventually allowed the transition into land. And we have our tetrapods, which now have limbs with digits. Okay? Whereas before we just had these fins with bones within them. Now we have the separation of the fins into digits and a limb. So a supporting structure to allow the colonization of land. So these are mostly terrestrial, right? Okay, our basal group of tetrapods are amphibians. And amphibians are your frogs and your salamanders. And they are terrestrial, but they are very dependent on water, okay, for their reproductive cycle. They either lay their eggs in water or in a very moist environment, so sometimes in leaves, which have a collection of water within them. There are some frogs that actually lay eggs in their back. They get embedded within their back, and then they hatch into tadpoles, and they develop into then full frogs, and then metamorphosize out their back. Yeah.
What does it say in the box?
The next amniota. Yeah.
So they fertilize like externally?
Yeah. So they have external fertilization as well. And generally it's in the water like fish. So the sperm and the eggs just mix together in a specific area. Sometimes the male is, mounting the female and then fertilizes them as she lays the eggs. So it's more tied together. Okay. All right. The continual or kind of advancement in terrestrial tetrapods and kind of the breakaway to the water environment occurred because of the amniotic egg. So development is still very dependent on a fluid environment, but the amniotic egg allowed it to be encapsulated within a shell, and so now you can keep that fluid from escaping and evaporating, and thus you could diversify more in the terrestrial environment. All right, so our basal amniotes are reptiles.
That is reptilia.
Reptilia, yeah, I just didn't write there.
This is why we need this word.
Okay?
You can say it.
I'm gonna try.
And then our last clade is mammals. So mammals produce milk. All right. And mammals, it took it a step further. Rather than having an external development, you can then have now an internal development. But the same kind of amniotic tissues apply. and are used in developing a placenta, which allows exchange between the mother and the fetus as it develops. And milk is a defining characteristic of mammals. But what was, in the video lecture, what was the actual structure which was more definitive and shows up in the fossil record?
So the 3 ear bones.
Has to do with 3 ear bones, but it is the dentary squamosal joint. Okay, what that means is the squamosal is a skull bone, and the dentary is the jawbone. Okay, and reptiles have a different joint, a different bone that touches a different bone in the skull and in the jaw. Yeah.
So which one do you want on the test for that?
This one.
You want that one?
Yeah.
Oh, then let's just erase milk then.
I mean, milk is important.
So,
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Don't knock on milk. Yeah.
Are there yolks in, like, really?
Okay, any other questions? I just put mammalia instead of mammals, reptilia instead of reptiles.
Where do birds fall?
Birds would fall under reptiles. Yeah. And you could get more technical than that as well. But yeah, birds are basically dinosaurs with feathers that can fly. All right, so let's go into further detail in this amniotic egg. Okay, the main structure which prevents desiccation or prevents drying out, of course, is the shell. All right, and you have some little alien-looking thing in here. All right, he's got a little head and tail. That's the embryo. Okay, and then there's a number of layers which are important for that embryo's development. The first one is the amnion. All right, the amnion is just to make him comfortable. All right, it's just a nice water bed for the little embryo. So if you shake the egg or it gets knocked around, it has a little cushion there. Okay, the embryo needs nutrients. And most of its nutrients it's going to get from the yolk sac. Okay, so the yolk in an egg has a lot of proteins, amino acids, which are important for the embryo development. Okay, fat for energy, all that's in the yolk sac.
Question.
Yeah.
Don't yolks in like chicken eggs, for example, have tons of cholesterol though?
Yeah. Yeah, so cholesterol is important for development as well.
Is that like universal for all?
I'm not sure. A good question. Probably not. Probably not universal. I don't know. All right, there's another embryonic membrane, which is important for gas exchange. Okay, this is called the allantois. Allantois. And it's important for waste and gas exchange. Okay, as you're developing, you're going to have waste products. They need to go somewhere, so it's going to go into that membrane. And then there's another membrane which goes all the way around, and that's the chorion. Okay, which is also for gas exchange. Okay, mammals, you and I, the placenta forms from these two layers. Okay, so when we're early on in our development, we get nutrients from the yolk sac, but eventually we deplete that of its resources. We need more. And so there's a connection which occurs between the allantois and the chorion, and then the mother's tissues to allow blood exchange and nutrient exchange, so that the embryo can continue developing.
That creates the what?
The placenta. There are other mammals that the placenta is formed by the yolk sac and the chorion, but in us it's the allantois and the chorion. Okay.
Is the yolk sac branching from the umbilical cord?
What's that? No, it just regresses. It's used up. Say again?
You said the allantois and the chorion form
The placenta.
placenta.
I'm not sure actually how the umbilical cord forms. What's that?
Okay, I don't know.
I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
That's a good question. Amniotic egg. Yep. All right. Here's our transitionary fossil Tiktaalik, which has it's a transitionary fossil because it has characters of both kind of ends of development. You have the fish, aquatic life cycle, and the tetrapod terrestrial life cycle. And so some of its fish characters are its scales. Okay, it has fish-like scales. And it also has fins. Okay, and then it also had a swim bladder. Okay, it did not have fully developed lungs. Okay, but it had a lot of tetrapod characters. Okay, so for example, its eyes, let's use a different color. Its eyes were on top of its head. So why would this be a terrestrial adaptation? Right, yeah, you don't have to look below you if it's nothing but land. Right, so it was probably up on land, looking out for predators or whatever above it. Whereas a fish, if a fish could only look up, it would be defenseless underneath it. Okay. It also has a flat head. Okay, this to support its eyes on top of its head. And it's basically losing characters which allow it to be streamlined and buoyant, and now gaining characters to help it to withstand the impacts of gravity while being on land. Okay. It also had ribs. Okay. Fish don't have, well, for the most part, they don't have ribs. They have a vertebrae and then an arch, which is above its vertebrae, and then this arch which comes below it. Okay, but this one had ribs, so this arch below it was not complete, right? All right, and then the really interesting part about its fins is it had so it had terrestrial-like bones in its fin, and by that it had a humerus. It had joints, bones similar to a wrist, and fingers. It's very rudimentary, and it doesn't look very much like what we have today in tetrapods. But you can see that from here you could have the evolution and development of those same bones. And especially when compared to the ray-finned fishes, which didn't have any of these sort of bones or structures within them. Okay, and then the last one, it had a neck. Okay, all these yellow ones you can put under tetrapod characters if you want, but I'm just going to leave them. All right. So fish don't need necks. They can just kind of turn their body in the water, and they're swimming anyway. If they had a neck, it would add drag to their streamlined body. But on land, a neck is very useful for being able to look around without having to move your whole body, right? So that's a terrestrial adaptation, is the development of a neck. Okay. This is a great example of, again, another intermediate fossil. What was another intermediate fossil we looked at?
Archaeopteryx.
Yeah, Archaeopteryx, which showed differences between birds and dinosaurs. This one is between terrestrial and aquatic fish and tetrapods. Okay.